I still remember the exact minute, Tuesday, 9:42 a.m. I was called into Mr. Denton's office like it was just another routine meeting. No heads up, no warning, just a cold voice from the secretary asking me to come upstairs. I didn't think much of it. I'd been there 29 years, nearly 3 decades. I thought maybe it was about the upcoming system upgrade or one of the junior guys messing something up. But when I walked in, I felt something was off. Denton didn't even look me in the eye. He sat stiff, emotionless, with an envelope in his hand. "James, we're letting you go, effective immediately." My heart stopped. "What?" I whispered, as if I misheard. "It's a structural change, nothing personal." Nothing personal? I gave them my youth, missed birthdays, anniversaries, even my dad's funeral because of last-minute deadlines. And now they were tossing me out like I was just excess furniture. I didn't say anything, I just stood there, frozen. I was scared if I spoke I'd break down. So I took the envelope, nodded like a fool, and left the room. The office felt smaller as I walked past my co-workers. Some looked confused, some avoided eye contact. I packed up the few personal things I had on my desk, an old family photo, a coffee mug my daughter gave me, and a small wooden ship I carved years ago. As I stepped out of the building, I realized something. Not a single goodbye, not even a thank you, just silence. But as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, I remembered something they didn't know, something I had buried for years, and in that moment I wasn't just hurt, I was awake. I didn't go home that day, I just drove, no destination, just miles of road and silence. I ended up parked in front of an old warehouse by the docks. It used to be a side project of the company, one they shut down years ago. But I knew the truth. I had the records, I had the backup drives, and more than that, I had the passwords. Back when Denton's father ran the company, he trusted me like a son. I wasn't just an employee, I was involved in nearly every major deal. I sat in on meetings that even Denton wasn't allowed into. I helped build their international supply chain. I helped set up the offshore accounts they thought no one knew about. And when they closed the docks division, I didn't erase everything. I kept a backup, just in case. And now, this was the case. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the old USB drive, still wrapped in the faded sticky note that read, "Use only if they forget who you are." I stared at it for a while, remembering how loyal I used to be. How many times I covered up for them. All the blind eyes I turned, thinking I was protecting the company I loved. But they didn't remember that. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. That night I sat in my basement with my old laptop, plugged in the drive, and opened the first folder. Bank transfers, invoices, fake client accounts, emails with dates, times, signatures, it was all still there. I took a deep breath. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet. But one thing was clear, they fired the wrong guy. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was racing, flipping through years of memories, decisions, and buried secrets. I kept thinking about the younger employees, people who looked up to me, who I mentored. Some of them had families, bills, dreams, and they were all at the mercy of men like Denton, who could destroy lives with a signature. And for what? To make room for cheaper labor? To erase the old guard who remembered too much? I realized then that this wasn't just about me getting fired, it was about justice, about making sure the people who sacrificed everything for that company weren't treated like garbage. So I started collecting things. Quietly, I still had access to a few servers. They must have forgotten to revoke my credentials in their rush. I downloaded documents, call recordings, security logs. Every night I backed up more data, piecing together a timeline of their shady business, fraud, tax evasion, shell companies in Panama, even bribes to local officials. But the most shocking part? The company was already in trouble, deep financial trouble. Denton had been manipulating the quarterly reports to impress the board, lying to investors. And firing me, along with a few other high-salary veterans, was their last-ditch effort to make the numbers look better. They were sinking, and I had the blueprint. Still, revenge wasn't enough. I wanted to hit them where it hurt most, not with noise or drama, but with something that would leave a scar they'd never recover from. So I reached out to someone. My old friend Rick, ex-journalist, now an independent investigator. He owed me a favor from years back. I sent him a preview of the files. He called me 2 hours later. His voice was tense. "James, this stuff is nuclear." I just smiled. "And I'm just getting started." Rick met me the next morning at a quiet diner on the edge of town. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade, but the moment our eyes met, the old bond was still there. He slid into the booth, his voice low. "You know, if we go public with this, it won't just end Denton's career. It could collapse the entire company." "That's the point," I said, staring down at my untouched coffee. "They buried people like me without a second thought. Let's see how they like being buried with the truth." We spent the next 2 weeks building a solid case, carefully curated documents, cross-checked reports, financial trails, internal memos. Rick knew how to dig deeper. He uncovered whistleblower complaints that had been silenced, HR cover-ups, even a harassment settlement that was swept under the rug. The web was bigger than I imagined. And still, part of me hesitated. I wasn't just risking Denton's reputation, I was going after the company I gave 29 years of my life to, the place where I met my wife, where I watched young kids grow into leaders, where my name still lived in the foundation of everything. But then I'd remember the way Denton looked at me that day, cold, detached, like I was nothing. That erased every doubt. Rick passed the story to a trusted media outlet. They promised to verify every detail before publishing, but even before it hit the news, something happened. I got a call. "Blocked number," I answered. A quiet, nervous voice on the other end. "James, it's Claire." From HR. I hadn't spoken to her in years. "They're panicking," she whispered. "Denton knows something's coming. He's firing people, cleaning house. People are scared. They're saying you're behind it." I leaned back and smiled to myself. Then let them be scared. Because they had no idea how much more was coming. 2 days later, the story broke. Front page. Every detail Rick and I had collected was laid bare for the world to see. Whistleblower exposes decades of fraud, cover-ups at Wilson and Lane Enterprises. Names, documents, dates, everything backed by facts. I sat alone in my apartment as the news anchors dissected the scandal hour by hour. My phone buzzed non-stop. Old colleagues, journalists, even strangers thanking me for speaking up. But I didn't feel triumphant, not yet, because I knew the real storm was still coming. That night, Denton finally called. I stared at his name on my screen for a full minute before answering. "James," he said, his voice tighter than usual. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" I replied calmly. "After firing me like trash?" "You don't understand what you've done," he snapped. "This company, my company, won't survive this kind of hit. You've put hundreds of jobs at risk." "No, Denton," I said, cutting him off. "You put them at risk. I just showed everyone the truth." There was silence. Then a low threat. "You think you've won? You have no idea who you're playing with." I hung up. He was angry. But underneath that, I could hear it in his voice. He was scared. And he had every reason to be. Within 24 hours, Wilson and Lane's board held an emergency meeting. Shareholders were livid. Lawsuits started piling in. Regulators announced a full investigation. And Denton? He vanished from the public eye, but I wasn't done, not even close, because there was one thing no one had uncovered yet, a secret I had kept all these years, a backup of every shady deal, every private email Denton thought he deleted. I'd built that server myself back in the early 2000s, and I made sure it never really lost anything. They thought I was just the old IT guy, the lifer, loyal, harmless, invisible, but they forgot I knew the system better than anyone. And now, I was about to burn it to the ground. The next morning, I walked into the federal office with a small black hard drive in my coat pocket. A young investigator named Melissa greeted me. She had sharp eyes and an energy that reminded me of myself 30 years ago, before cynicism dulled the edges. "You sure this has what you say it does?" she asked as we sat across from each other in a quiet interview room. I slid the drive across the table. Every dirty secret, emails, account trails, private memos, stuff even their legal team doesn't know exists. She plugged it in. Her eyes widened as the files loaded, folder after folder, each labeled with precise timestamps, locations, and names. This could change everything. I nodded. That's the idea. Over the next few days, the scandal exploded even further. Not just headlines anymore. Primetime TV, congressional panels, Wall Street panic. And the best part, they couldn't bury it. Not this time. The board tried to distance themselves. Denton's former allies started leaking dirt just to save themselves. One by one, they turned on each other. Then one morning, it happened. FBI raid at Wilson & Lane corporate headquarters. Former CEO Charles Denton under federal investigation. I watched the footage with my morning coffee. Officers storming through glass doors I used to walk through every day. Denton, grey-faced, handcuffed, being led out in silence. That was the moment I let myself breathe, not smile, not yet. Because this wasn't just about revenge, it was about dignity, about reminding them that loyalty doesn't mean silence, that decades of service should never end with a pink slip and a security escort. But more than that, it was about all the others they had crushed, the interns they underpaid, the whistleblowers they silenced, the employees they discarded like broken tools. I hadn't just exposed a company, I'd started something bigger, and the world had finally begun to listen. A week later, I got a call I never expected. It was from Sarah. She had been my assistant for over a decade, sharp, loyal, and more ethical than most people in that building. She'd stayed quiet all these years out of fear. But now, her voice trembled with something else. Courage. "James, I saw what you did. I just wanted to say, thank you. You gave all of us hope." I was silent for a second. No one had said that to me in a long time. Then she added, "I'm leaving the company. I've had enough. A few of us are thinking of starting something new. Honest this time." I smiled. Count me in. That single call triggered a ripple effect. More ex-employees started reaching out, people who had been overlooked, mistreated, and discarded. We met in coffee shops, in old conference rooms we rented by the hour just to share ideas. It was messy at first. We had no funding, no clear vision, but what we had was trust, and a fire none of us could extinguish. Together, we built something from the ashes, a consultancy that valued people over profits, that trained young minds instead of exploiting them. We even hired some of the whistleblowers who were once blacklisted. Slowly, our names started circulating in the business world, not because of money, but because of the values we stood for: honesty, fair treatment, integrity. We were everything Wilson & Lane pretended to be. And guess what? Clients noticed. Some of their biggest accounts started knocking on our door. Not because of flashy pitches, but because of our story. Because people were tired of suits who lied and leaders who ruled by fear. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. Not just at a job, but in a movement. And I knew this wasn't just payback anymore. This was a legacy being born. It was around Christmas when the final blow landed. I was sipping coffee at home when I got the email. Subject line, URGENT, Wilson & Lane. Investigation. I opened it, heart pounding. It was from a journalist I had spoken to months ago. He said the investigation was complete. The exposé would go live the next morning. And it did. A front-page story titled 29-Year Employee Fired Without Warning Uncovers Corruption Worth Millions. It was my story, but it was also Sarah's and Peter's and everyone else they discarded. The article revealed everything: fraudulent accounts, unethical layoffs, bribes swept under the rug. And there it was in black and white, Wilson's signature approving it all. By noon, the media frenzy began. TV channels, podcasts, online blogs. Everyone wanted to talk about it. About me, about how a quiet, loyal man brought down a corporate empire without throwing a single punch. That same evening, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from again. Wilson. His voice had lost its edge. "James." "What do you want?" I let the silence stretch. Then I said calmly, "Nothing. I already have what I wanted." "You've ruined me," he said, almost whispering. "No," I replied. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped protecting you." Click. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free. He took 29 years of my life, but he never took my dignity. And now he had to live with the shame of knowing that the man he discarded like trash was the one who buried his empire. The days that followed were surreal. Everywhere I went, people recognized me. Neighbors who used to barely nod suddenly wanted to talk. Young professionals messaged me, thanking me for standing up, for proving that silence isn't always surrender. One day, I walked past the old Wilson and Lane building. It was quiet. The logo had been taken down. The windows were papered up. A Felice sign hung where once a golden plaque displayed the company name. I just stood there. Memories flooded back. My first day on the job, the late nights, the laughter with colleagues, even the betrayal. It all felt like a different lifetime. Suddenly I heard a familiar voice behind me. "James." I turned. It was Peter, the one who had quit just before I was fired. His hair had grayed a bit, but his eyes were still sharp. "I read everything," he said. "You did what I never could. I'm proud of you." We sat on a nearby bench catching up. He told me about his consulting firm. Then with a serious tone, he added, "You've got a name now, James. People trust you. They see you as the guy who stood up." I shrugged. "I didn't do it to be a hero." "I know," he said. "That's why you became one." Later that evening, I got an invitation to speak at a university's business ethics seminar. Then another to consult for a company that promised transparency and fairness. I realized maybe my story wasn't ending. Maybe it was just beginning again, on my terms. 1 year later, I stood on a stage, looking out at hundreds of young faces. Business students, hopeful and eager. I shared my story, not just about the betrayal, but about perseverance, dignity, and the power of knowing your worth. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then came the applause. Not polite clapping, real, emotional applause. And that's when I realized I hadn't just gotten revenge on Wilson and Lane. I had transformed the pain they caused into something powerful. My name was now associated with fairness, ethics, and courage. Small businesses started reaching out asking for guidance. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was rebuilding from the ground up. And as for the people who once sat in that boardroom and stripped me of my job like I was disposable, they'd lost more than just a business. They lost their legacy, their name, their honor. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to fight dirty. I let the truth do the talking. And in the end, the man they cast aside became the man people stood up to applaud. Because I didn't just know a secret about their business, I was the secret all along.